You're listening to Protecting What Matters, a podcast by the Ohio Department of Commerce. Commerce is Ohio's chief regulator, and we play a vital role in keeping you safe by protecting your property, your money, and some of the products you use every day. This podcast is designed to bring awareness to important issues and help educate consumers and businesses. Join us as we chat with trusted industry experts focused on providing you with the tools you need to help you protect what matters most in your life.
Not only should you be aware of how you're spending your money, you should also be aware of how your money habits are affecting, let's say, your credit score or your credit report.
Welcome to Protecting What Matters, a podcast by the Ohio Department of Commerce. I'm Dean Orzano, Manager of Investor Education, Outreach, and Communications for the Division of Securities. And joining me today is Victoria Yurkovich. She's Manager of the Consumer Affairs section for the Division of Financial Institutions. Welcome, Victoria. How are you doing today?
I am well. How are you?
I'm doing really good. Thank you. And what we want to talk about today and share some tips for our listeners is how they should take some time during this part of the year to look at their financial situation, assess how they're doing compared to their goals that they may have set earlier in the year, and then really how to start setting goals for 2023. From a financial services perspective, Victoria, why is it important that consumers should do an end of the year self-check?
So it's kind of like when you do any big projects, you really want to evaluate your steps in achieving that project, whether it's home repair or whether it's you're starting to budget more, whatever the case might be, you want to evaluate your progress. So it's similar to our finances. You want to see where you were in 2022 to effectively plan for 2023, because we all have great intentions at the beginning of the year. We, maybe create New Year's resolutions or set goals for ourselves, and we really, for the most part, try to commit to, let's say, budgeting better, or saving more, or maybe taking the leap of widening our investments. But good intentions without the follow-through is what really gets people nowhere. And the key to setting goals and creating resolutions is to really act on them. And that leads us to the achievement that we're looking for. So this is the time to reassess your finances and review your spending habits. Maybe take a snapshot of your spending patterns. That can be helpful to set more relevant or attainable goals for 2023. So you might want to take a look back at your monthly expenses from the beginning of 2022. Ask some questions like, where's my money going, or where did I spend my money? How can I prevent racking up debt? How can I pay down my debt? How can I build better credit? There's online calculators that you can kind of plug in your monthly expenses, and that really shows a nice review of where you've been spending your money, how much you're going towards bills, entertainment, your wants versus your needs. So you just want to look at, where was I in 2022? Where did my money go? Was it a rough year? Was it a great year? How can I improve from there? Or what are some things I'm going to be thinking about for 2023?
Yeah, that's all really good stuff. When you said write out your New Year's resolutions, but if you don't act on them, it's kind of a waste of time if you write them down then they don't do anything.
Right, and we see it for just all New Year's resolutions in general, and I think it applies to finances as well. I remember being in my 20s and thinking, I'm going to budget more, because that's what everyone's talking about. You got to budget. You want to know where your money's going. And I remember starting in January, pulled out my laptop, tried to do the whole Excel spreadsheet, and by March, I never went back.
Forgot all about it.
Right. So
good intentions.
Yes, good intentions, but did not follow through. And I'll kind of talk about a little bit later on how we can kind of fix that. The big thing that is to come up next, though, is what should investors be doing?
Yeah. So, what you said, I think the same thing applies to investors, like you described for any other kind of, planning. Investment planning doesn't stop once you make the investment. You really don't want to set it and forget it, right? Because the markets are going to continually change, especially in this past year. We've seen, obviously, record high inflation. We've seen, how that's impacted Wall Street. Wall Street doesn't like conflicts. They don't like it, rattles them, and that makes those markets, go up and down. And so you really have to be able to, adjust and be ready. So, we know investors went through a lot since 2020 when COVID appeared. People transitioned to work from home. We generally saw a rise in stocks in 2021, but then they fall off dramatically this year. And again, that rattled not only Wall Street, but also individual investors, especially people who are newly retired or they're soon to be retired investors. They've been particularly nervous about the impact of all these things on their investments. In fact, I read a survey put out recently by a major investment firm that showed only about a third of American workers say that they're confident that they're going to be on track to retire when they want, afford the lifestyle they want in retirement, and live comfortably without running out of money. I mean, that's scary for people.
Yeah, that is.
And so, again, it comes back to planning and following that plan. And checking that plan on a regular basis, for 2022. So again, it's a timely reminder that volatility is a feature in financial markets. As I said, the markets were generally good in 2020 through 21, but 2022 reminded us what goes up will occasionally go down. The good news is that historically stocks will rise at some point in the future. So again, it's important to stay informed and be prepared to take advantage of those markets.
Right, which I think is also important for those that want to potentially invest or learn a little bit more about investing. This doesn't only affect those that have been investing for years, our elderly folks. It really affects people that are, I want to invest more, but I'm kind of, markets and what I've been reading and hearing in the news, it's a little unsettling. So
Right.
I think giving them that, it can go up and down and you kind of just have to ride out the wave. It's reassuring that, okay, this is something that I could potentially do.
Right. I mean, the worst thing you do is to do nothing.
Right.
I mean, if you do nothing, then nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
So again, it really comes back to the importance of reviewing your plan and then setting a new plan for 2023. Welcome back to Protecting What Matters. We're talking with Victoria Yurkovich, manager of the Consumer Affairs section for the Division of Financial Institutions, about why consumers should be performing a year-end financial review and setting financial goals for the new year. I'm Dan Orzano, manager of Outreach and Education for the Division of Securities. Victoria, let's pivot to 2023. What should consumers consider as they think about the new year and their finances?
So if you feel that 2022 was an accurate depiction of what potentially 2023 could look like, you might want to spend the first few months of the new year just tracking your spending. Whether you possibly use like the old school method of Excel or maybe a program that you have on your computer or an app on your phone, the key isn't necessarily to limit yourself this year. The goal is to just be more aware of where you're spending your money currently.
It's interesting. I think a lot of people really don't know how much they're spending on a daily, weekly, monthly basis on the little things, right? That daily cup of coffee, grabbing lunch instead of bringing lunch.
Right.
You go to the grocery store and you really didn't intend to buy that bag of chips, but it looks pretty good. It's one more thing, and it all adds up. But I don't think people think about that, how quickly that can add up, and you only have so much of a pot to pull from.
Right, exactly.
Right, and so the more you do things like that, the quicker that pot disappears, and then you get to the end of the month, it's like, where's all my money?
Yeah, and it also, if you are trying to, really crunch down and start to really budget, limit yourself because you want to put a little bit more towards saving or investing, and you're thinking, I can't increase my income. There's no way that I can go above and beyond what I'm doing. How can I tighten myself a little bit without feeling like I'm too restricted? So utilizing the technology that's out there to find, better gas prices, or to maybe look at, food subscription services that maybe allow you to shop a little bit more efficiently, or looking into, where am I shopping? At my local grocery store, is it really the best route for me to go to? If I could tighten certain areas of my budget where I'm not feeling like too deprived, that could give me some wiggle room for, better investment opportunities, or saving more, or maybe putting an emergency fund together if I don't have one.
And this is, again, you have to be flexible because, we've all seen, again, an increase in gas prices, and now they're starting to trend down. But again, how do you plan? Can you plan for that, right? I mean, it's something that is unexpected. And so when you have to spend more on one thing, you may have to cut back on another. And ultimately, again, you're still pulling from one pot, and the only other option is start throwing it on credit.
Right.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion in terms of using credit efficiently.
Right, exactly.
So you don't dig yourself deeper into debt, and again, that's going to have an impact on your planning.
Right. And I think the biggest lesson for a lot of folks is to really pay attention to the fact that you look at the stock market, look at just, general from year to year with inflation or with, mortgage rates and increases and this and that. It changes constantly. Your income may change year to year.
Or not.
Or
It may
not
not change,
Or it may
right?
not change, but you have to be flexible. So what are some tips that you can give when it comes to, evaluating investments?
Yeah, so evaluating the performance of your investments is really critical. To monitor your assets over time. You're giving examples of your other accounts, and so you need to do that annual review at the beginning of the year, and then remind yourself that you got to continue to be engaged, tracking your progress against your goals, and that's again goes back to the planning. And so one of the things you should be getting from your brokerage or your firm or the agent you're doing business with, you should be getting regular brokerage statements, whether it's monthly or quarterly. And you really need to look at them. Again, if you don't pay attention, things are going to change, and then you're going to be caught unaware and have to maybe deal with it later. So make sure you're getting those statements. Make sure you're looking at those statements. Again, they may come in the mail. Maybe they're coming in your email. But you really have to kind of watch those and know where you are, because unless you know where you are, you know where you're going to go with it. So whatever types of securities you hold, I do have some tips to help you evaluate and monitor your performance and prepare for 2023. So one of the things you should always do is factor in transaction fees. It's amazing. A lot of people don't realize the fees that sometimes incur when you're trading stocks or making changes to your account. So it's important to include those, because those could add up. And just make sure that you're watching out for those fees. And if you're not sure, call the firm and they can usually walk you through that. You talked earlier about creating a spreadsheet. The same thing should happen with your investments. Some people are good in spreadsheets, and other people might want to use apps, as you say were earlier. Again, the bottom line is create something that works for you so that you can track your investments, track the value, and understand, how those investments are going from month to month or from year to year. And that's especially important if you've got money in multiple accounts. I mean, you could have a 401k with your work, you could have a CD with a bank, you could have some other kind of an investment such as a pension program. And you have to be able to pull all those together and track those individually and then collectively. So again, you get a much broader picture of how things are going for you. The other thing that you want to do is consider the role of taxes on your performance. Again, this is something that you should probably get some professional help with, a CPA or someone who's a tax expert, because again, there could be an impact on your investments when it comes to tax season. And so you want to make sure that you understand how that works. And again, the best thing is to use a tax professional. We talked about this earlier. This next tip is dealing with inflation. All right, it's definitely a factor, whether it's high, whether it's low. You have to know how that has an impact on you in the short and the long term, because inflation can play a big role in calculating, what that means to your money loss or value over time. You also want to look back a couple of years and see how you've been doing, what are the returns like a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. A lot of times when you look at investments, they're going to show a history, 5 years, 10 years, but that's really not the best indicator.
Right.
But at least it gives you an idea. But at least for you, you can see year by year how you're doing and how that tracks against ultimately what your goals were. And then if you have to make changes, rebalance your portfolio, rebalance your accounts, prepared to make changes to do that. And again, if you're not quite sure how that all works, your firm or investment advisor can help do that. When we come back, we're going to share some additional tips to help you protect what matters most, your savings and your investments. Welcome back to Protecting What Matters. Today we're talking about why consumers should be performing a year-end financial review and setting financial goals for the new year. In our last segment, we covered quite a bit of area, but in this last one, we want to share some additional tips with our listeners to help them protect their savings and investments. So Victoria, I know you've got a number of tips on the savings side. And again, these are things I think anybody can do, but I think in general they're just going to be very helpful as people think about how they're going to be planning and moving forward in 2023.
Yeah, because not only should you be aware of how you're spending your money, you should also be aware of how your money habits are affecting, let's say, your credit score or your credit report. And one of the things that we always encourage with the Division of Financial Institutions, especially in our Office of Consumer Affairs, is getting a free copy of your credit report. Currently, during COVID, and they've still expanded this, they are allowing free credit reports weekly. But in the past, it was every year. You can go to annualcreditreports.com and get an annual report. And a lot of folks ask, why is this important? Why do I need to do this? It helps you, one, look at overall your report to see where you are in terms of, are you a good lend or a potential good borrower so that you can lend? But it also can help you spot fraud or any potential identity theft issues. Because if you see a line of credit that was opened on your report that you don't remember obviously opening, you're thinking, wait a second, how does this happen? And then you can kind of investigate that a little bit further or contact them to let them know.
I think credit reports are something a lot of people forget about.
Yes.
It's really a great tool. It's out there, it's free. And as you said, some of the rules have been changed in terms of how often you can use it. Before you could maybe do once a year.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit harder to track. Now you can do it a lot more often. So yeah, that's definitely a great tip.
And I think people confuse the two. Like they think, well, what's the difference between a credit report and my credit score? And your report lets you know what your outstanding accounts look like and kind of gives you a little bit of a debt to ratio information. Your score is based off that report. And it's the number that lenders will look at in terms of allowing you to open a credit line or to take a loan out. So your credit reports affect mortgage rates, credit card approvals, apartment rentals, and even for potential folks, job applications.
Yeah.
So I want to give a few financial tips that I think can help folks for 2023, or can just give you some oversight to kind of evaluate, where am I in terms of, my money habits, and is there a way that I can improve a little bit? So
Sure.
The biggest thing would be obviously to increase your credit score. A lot of people have a lower credit score than they think, and so checking that number and making sure it's at a number you're comfortable with and you feel like you're going to do your best. Here are some ways that if you don't, that you can improve it. So paying all your bills on time or in the full amount, not just your minimum balance. Keeping your debt to income ratio low. And ways that you can do that is obviously to pay off any credit card debt that you have, avoid taking additional debt out, and also increase income if possible. Also, don't apply for new accounts too often. The more accounts you open, the more they're doing credit checks, and every ding can add up, which can affect your score in the long term. And then also consider meeting with a financial advisor or expert at your local bank to assess, personal financial situations and determine ways to that you can improve your score. Another tip that I like to give is enroll in automatic payment programs for your bills when you can. Because the thing is, sometimes we forget about those bills. You have to think about, I have a mortgage or I have rent to do every month. I also have utility bills. For some, it can bulked into one thing. For others, it could be, separate for my gas, my electric, my water, my trash. And so a lot of times we're paying to so many different people that we kind of forget, okay, my payment's due on the 12th for this place, it's on the 20th for this, it's 31st for that. So if there's ways that you can have auto pay to really eliminate the things you definitely know you're going to be paying month to month, that also eliminates the potential of missed payments, potential fees, penalties, and possible negative marks on your credit.
I see, it seems like more and more lately, I see ads on television for these free credit apps and these free credit reports and, sign up for this, or, I did this and my credit score increased 100 points.
Right.
I mean, what's behind all that?
I think some of those are a little bit of a red flag. You have to know that there's always going to be companies that are trying to help you repair your credit, and they're trying to, let's have you work with us and we'll take on your debt and then we'll work with the companies. And you have to just be conscientious of like, does this sound too good to be true? There's ways that you can work with your credit card companies one-on-one to eliminate high debt that you owe them, or is there a way to decrease my interest rates? Some people will say, oh, it's nearly impossible to do it now, but it really depends on the company or the bank. And with the way that, post-COVID inflation rates, they're trying to, help people the best they can, and they want you to pay them. They want your money. And so if they have to only take, 80% of what you owe them versus the 100, they'd rather take that than nothing at all.
I was curious because it's probably nothing is free.
Right.
If you do it yourself,
Yeah.
it's mostly free.
Right.
But if you use some of these organizations that are advertising, their app or whatever, there's maybe taking a percentage or doing something, which again, we talked earlier about all the little things that add up. That's
Right.
one more thing that, you didn't know maybe you were going to have to spend money on, but you need to know because
Right.
again, the money's going somewhere.
Yeah.
And so if you don't want to be paying those fees or things, then you got to find ways to do it yourself. So.
And I think that's too, like, you're the one that got yourself in this debt, regardless of the situation. And I know some people, there's hardships in life, and yes, and there's other situations where they just frivolously spent and they didn't really pay attention. But the bottom line is to get into the hole, you want to dig yourself out because there's no easy way to do it other than to just, pay it, work with your credit card companies, figure out how you're going to, eliminate the debt that you can, or to keep that debt to income ratio as low as possible.
Got to put in the work and take the action. We said that earlier. If you don't do anything, nothing's going to change.
The other big tips I like to give, one of them being pay yourself first. And a lot of people get very confused. They're like, what do you mean pay myself first? That doesn't really make any sense to me. But when you're thinking about it, when you're creating a savings plan, you're ultimately paying yourself back. So if you have one that you evaluate how you contribute to more, or if you don't have one, 2023 is the year to start that. Also, big thing for those that are kind of like new to the budgeting world or are a little overwhelmed by it, start with the basics. Whether you want to invest more or maybe look at opening savings accounts or maybe you want to build up an emergency fund, the numbers always fluctuate. Some financial folks on social media or in the world will tell you, oh, you only need 6 months. Some will say you need 12 months at least. Some say up to 3 years. You be your own deciding factor on that, on how much emergency fund money you want to have stowed away. But the key thing here is do not do too much. Yeah. The more pressure you put on yourself to be perfect about everything, the more likely you will fall through and throw in the towel early.
Yeah, I think it's true that you get money advice from all kinds of sources, but ultimately you have to do what works for you.
Exactly.
Because everybody's situation is different.
Another thing you want to consider is safer ways to transact your money. I know it's something that I always like to, fit in with my financial literacy tips or just money habit tips, and it's always to how to be more conscientious about fraud and identity theft. So credit cards can get a bad rep, but if you use them for their purpose, I charge a $100 bill and then I know by the end of the month my bill's coming up. If I pay off that $100, I'm not going to accrue any interest or any additional fees. The real purpose of a credit card, borrow money but pay it back in full. It's really your safest option when trying to pay for items or purchases of any sort. And they also sometimes have incentives and money back perks to it. So a lot of folks are like, but there's peer-to-peer apps and it's so flexible and I have a debit card and I don't want credit cards because I'm afraid that I'm gonna rack up debt. If you're disciplined and use it effectively, you won't. Debit cards just sometimes run the risk of, if you are hacked, they have direct access to your funds. So getting that money back if they were to withdraw funds is a lot longer and a lot more of a hassle than if your credit card got hacked and it's borrowed money per se. So it's not physical money in the pot. And with peer-to-peer apps, there's just not a lot of protections there. So you just want to be aware of when you're using it and who you're transacting with when using those types of apps.
Yeah, I think that's another example where, before you jump into the fray and take a recommendation of trying something, you need to really investigate, the pros and the cons and,
right.
and the potential things that can happen. So when it comes to the investing side, probably the one thing I like to remind people of is, you don't have to do this alone. You can work with a financial professional. Obviously there's considerations for that. But considering hiring someone to help you navigate the complex world of investing, and it can be very complex. There's so many different options out there. There's so many different possibilities. But again, as we said earlier, you have to do what works for you, not what the average person does or what the majority of people do. You really need to find somebody who will work for you and work for you directly in terms of what your specific goals and aspirations are and where you want to go. So considering hiring a financial advisor or a financial planner, if you do choose to work with someone, you always want to make sure you do a little bit of a background check. There's a couple ways you can do that. One of the things I point to people a lot of times as a starting point, there's a website called BrokerCheck. It's put out by the FINRA organization, which is a federally organization that tracks and watches over the brokers. And so you could start there, and if you go in, you can put in the person's name, you can get a little bit of their background, their history, their education, if there's anything in their file that shows maybe someone had a problem with them and if it was resolved. That's just a good place to start. I mean, obviously you could get recommendations from people, but even if you did, you really should check out the person and maybe have a first-time meeting with them just to see is it compatible? Do you guys agree on your investment strategy and those kind of things, again, because it's an individual choice. The other thing you can do, you can always contact our investor protection hotline and ask if the person is licensed to sell securities in Ohio, if any enforcement action has been taken against them, and we'll certainly help people find the right person. Now, we don't make recommendations. We can just tell you what we know about the person, and then again, you have to kind of take it upon yourself. And by the way, that number is 877-683-7841. Again, that's our Securities Investor Protection Hotline that you can call if you have a question about a broker, a financial planner, or maybe if you even got a product offering, you can maybe do a little bit of checking, and our folks would definitely be glad to help you with that. And one thing we say is if you don't understand the investment, don't invest.
Gotcha.
And so that's another opportunity to use our organization and our experts to maybe help you if you have questions about those things. One of the other things I wanted to kind of mention, especially right now, as I said earlier, with the markets going up and down, is a lot of consumer-facing financial media stories I read is should people be investing in the market, given the conditions. And I think there's different schools of thought depending on really who's giving that advice. One side thinks when prices are low, you should buy. Others feel that we haven't seen the bottom yet, and it might be best to wait. But again, no one can predict what the market's going to do today, tomorrow, or next week. So again, as an investor, you have to determine what your level of risk is, and you have to adjust accordingly. And again, I think this is another example where you should really seek out professional advice,
Right.
Because it is complex. And certainly we're talking your life savings or your retirement accounts, and the last thing you want to do is lose money for something that you could have avoided. And also, again, just keeping track of what's going on in the market in general so you can stay on top of things and make adjustments if you have to. So we've talked about a lot of things today, Victoria. We talked about evaluating what you did in 2022. We talked about planning in 2023. So I really want to thank you for taking the time for sharing information and tips on year-end financial planning. And also to remind our listeners to visit the Ohio Department of Commerce website at com.ohio.gov. Look for the Consumer Resources Understanding Finances section for more information. And again, thank you for listening to this episode of Protecting What Matters, and best wishes for a healthy and financially successful new year. Victoria, that goes to you as well as our listeners.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.